Hey folks, today's episode will be a very interesting one. Our guest is retired FDLE Special Agent Tommy Ray, one of the lead detectives in the case of quadruple murderer Nelson Serrano, the man convicted for the 1997 execution-style murders of 4 people in Bartow, Florida. Tommy takes us inside the investigation, including how he had to get creative to get Serrano extradited from Ecuador and back to Florida to stand trial. We will also be discussing his role in solving the Danny Rawling Gainesville student murders. This case shook the University of Florida campus in August of 1990 and involved the brutal murders of 5 students. Thank you for tuning in, and now for the episode with Tommy Ray. Hey, welcome back everyone to Todd's podcast. I think you're going to really enjoy our episode today. We've got a really interesting guest. He's got a lot to talk about. It's going to focus on law enforcement and some other things he had done during his career of law enforcement. And his name is Tommy Ray. Tommy had a distinguished 40-year career as a former detective with the Winter Haven PD, the Polk County Sheriff's Office. He was also a special agent with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which is the statewide law enforcement agency. I guess the FDLE is kind of the state equivalent of the FBI. That's how you would look at it. Tommy worked on numerous high-profile cases, including the Gainesville student murders, the dismantling of several complex methamphetamine smuggling organizations, and maybe the highest-profile case was the Nelson Serrano quadruple murder case that happened in Bartow. I thought it was in Mulberry.
No, it was in Bartow.
It was in Bartow.
Yep.
Okay. Did the victims live in Mulberry? Were they Mulberry residents? Is that
No, they were Winter Haven. They lived in Winter Haven.
Okay. Tommy also helped create the cold case playing cards, which we're going to talk about first. And they've been introduced to the state and the county prison systems. And it's really interesting how he came up with the idea of this and the success he's had. While Tommy was at the FDLE, he was awarded the Special Agent of the Year in 2006. He also received the rarely awarded FDLE Enforcement Commissioner's Medal in 2008. And also he received the Special Agent of the Year award in 1996 and was named the FOP Officer of the Year in 2002. So Tommy has an incredible career in law enforcement. We've been fortunate that it's been mainly here in our area. He's worked to keep us safe, and he's also been a technical advisor to the Glades TV series. He's appeared on a number of TV shows like Dateline, 48 Hours, the Deck Cold Case podcast, America's Most Wanted. He's done a number of those things. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. My unofficial co-host is the Cuban Missile himself, Nick Del Castillo. He's a former special agent with the FDLE and also former deputy sheriff with the Polk County Sheriff's Office. Nick was on our podcast a couple of episodes ago, and he was telling me about Tommy and these cards that we're going to talk about. And he put us together. And so Nick will be here today and has some insights that I don't possess in talking to Tommy in some of these cases. So Nick, welcome.
Todd, thank you very much. Nice to see you again.
Yeah.
And it's great to be back here again.
Yeah.
So.
We'll get to you in a second, but your stint, you were an extra on the Glades. Were you the romantic lead with that beautiful woman that was the lead? Or
That would have been nice, but that was not the case. I was a killer. That was going to go into a restaurant and shoot the restaurant up.
And not the Cuban drug dealer. You were the killer this time. You got a promotion. Good.
So I was carrying an automatic weapon and going to be going into the restaurant, but the cops come at the last minute and
to save
put
the
us
day.
on the ground. Yes.
Excellent. Well, welcome, Nick. Welcome, Tommy. Appreciate you coming in. Let's talk a little bit. How did you get into the cold case division? That seems to be what you really were trained to do and what your avocation is.
Todd, thanks for having me, first of all.
Of course.
And co-host Nick. Well, actually, in 1982, when I was working as a detective with the Polk County Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Grady Judd was in the captain. And they had a opening for a cold case investigator, which they hadn't had before. And so I was selected and began working cold cases in 1982 for the Sheriff's Office, at which time we had 33 unsolved homicide only at that time within the county.
Wow.
The county itself, not cities, but in the county.
What kind of training do you have to undergo for a cold case? I mean, do you have like extra hours in the classroom? Is a lot of it just an intuition and dogged determination? I think that's got to be a big part of it, and you're just naturally curious.
I think the fact that you don't want anybody to get away with any crimes, but especially a homicide. I mean, you think about somebody taking someone's life away. And as far as the training, just different homicide schools, but common sense plays a big role, and the fact that you just stick with it and you don't, give up. You just,
it's got to be a drive that an itch you just can't scratch until you get it taken care of.
It is. It was like something, that drives you insane until you reach, a conclusion. And also, always had the attitude that there's no case that can't be solved, as far as homicide cases, that the suspects always made a mistake somewhere along the line, and you just have to find that mistake.
So I wanted to talk about some of the cases in a minute, but one of the things that Nick had told me about and gave me a couple of these decks of cards of unsolved cold cases. And tell us a little bit about them. These are decks of cards, and you've given me several boxes of them to look through. But tell us how you came up with this idea for the playing cards, how you distributed them, how you got them funded. It had to be a little bit of an uphill battle at first.
Well, we had something, though. It put together a cold case assessment team, and that was where the prosecutors for the homicide division for the Polk County and the detectives from, all the different agencies, including the sheriff's office, we would meet up and we would go over cases with PowerPoint. And, you even had the medical examiner, Dr. Nelson, was there,
right,
as well as crime scene techs. And so during this time period, we were talking about ways to solve some of these cases. And I had gone to Coleman Federal Prison to interview a guy on a drug methamphetamine case a year or two earlier. Turned out it was the wrong guy that I went to talk to, but while I was sitting there, I just asked him, do you know anything about any unsolved homicide cases? And he starts saying, yes, but it's already been solved. The guy's in prison. Well, the case was Angela Nash. It was a young girl that was shot and killed off Dean Steele Road in Polk City about 2 years earlier. Well, anyway, I knew the case unsolved, so went back. We were able to get enough to charge the guy who was about to be released from prison, Darrell Thomas, and with the homicide. So I got to thinking, if we could just talk to all these inmates, because everybody that's in jail is not a bad person. And I thought about, if we could put these on the cards. I knew they had the fugitive
playing cards.
Yeah, the playing cards. I knew they had the fugitive cards out there, but, most of the fugitives were being arrested before the cards were even finished printing. So I got with Crime Stoppers, Wayne Cross, who, and Sheriff Judd, and they agreed to put these unsolved cases on these decks of cards and put them into the Polk County Jail locally initially. This was back in 2005. So that's what we did. I went to all the different agencies, got with their homicide detectives, picked the cases that they wanted on the decks of cards. So we put together 52 cases and put them on the playing cards, and then we put them in the Polk County Jail initially.
So how are they distributed? I mean, is this for the inmates when they're sitting around playing cards, passing the time of day? How did you envision them being utilized by the inmates?
Well, as many interviews that I've done over the years in the prisons, I knew that most of the time they were spent, playing cards. And so I could see them playing cards, with these unsolved murders, and it'd be something that they'd be compelled to look at. And that, sure enough, was the case.
So they may be playing a jack of clubs and say, hey, here's Mary Smith. I had a roommate in this jail last year, and he said he knew someone that knew something about it. And so it gets you leads. Is that what the whole thought process was just to get more information to come into you and your team?
It was. We had it set up where they could anonymously, contact the detective or the state attorney's office and provide this information, without being unknown, through Crime Stoppers tips and various other ways.
Has it been successful? I mean, this is not just something you left in Polk County. You've done this worldwide, right?
After we put them in, there was like a 2-month lag time. But, initially when I went to bring the cards up at the cold case assessment team meeting, a lot of people were like, that's not going to work. People are going to be making false confessions, and, some of my guys be chasing their tails with all these false confessions. I said, well, let's just give it a shot and see. So for about 2 months, nothing. We didn't hear anything, and after we had put the cards in, so some of the same naysayers were like, I told you. Well, it just so happened there was a Lakeland case, a Thomas Grammer. He was shot there in Lakeland, and Brad Grice was a detective who was working the case. Well, Brad gets a call through Crime Stoppers that this inmate has information on the case. And so through the follow-up, there was enough to arrest 2 guys that actually committed the homicide. So that was the first break of the cards. And
just from a lead you got from guys playing
yeah,
cards, probably weren't playing bridge, but they were doing something in jail.
Yeah, playing poker, and the one guy gets the card and says, so-and-so told me, that he killed this guy.
Right.
And that's how,
Get you a lead.
Yeah, the lead came forward, and Brad followed it up, and enough to charge the guy. So when that happened, it kind of went national, for a time. There was a lot of media coverage
Right.
for the case and all. So I contacted the commissioner, Bailey, at the time for FDLE, and Ken Tucker, who was the assistant commissioner. And I said, if we could do this statewide, if we could put a deck of cards of 52 cases throughout the state, each county you submit, so many cases that we come up with 52, I guarantee there could be several murders solved as a result. So Commissioner said, are you sure? I said, yes, sir. I wasn't 100% sure, but I knew the success we had locally. I'm just thinking if we could do it.
Right.
So within another few months, and this is going from 2005 to 2007 when this finally happened, when we put them, we got 145,000 decks of cards through a federal grant that paid for the cards. And so we put them in every prison in the state of Florida. And I think it was another 2 months or so, we get our first case that was solved, an Ingrid Luga. It was a lady that was found out of Fort Myers there. She had been moved from where she was murdered and thrown into a pond. And so one of the inmates came forward, and so that case was solved. And one thing about the inmate didn't want anything for it. So, I was able to interview him later and say, what made you come forward with this? And he goes, this could have been my mother, brother, sister,
Right.
That kind of thing. He goes, if it was drugs or burglary or theft, I wouldn't say anything, but this is a murder case. And so there was also a $1,000 reward that would have gone to him, but he said, give that reward to the victim's family.
Wow.
Which was, my hat's off to the guy.
Yeah.
And then a few weeks later, there's a guy by the name of James Foote that was shot near a bar, and that case was solved.
How many cases have been solved, do you think, from your playing cards?
Well, within the state of Florida, I would say at this point probably 10 cases, but all the cases aren't documented.
Right.
So a lot of cases are solved, and then you never hear anything about it. But, we started out with deck 1, and we went all the way to deck 7, 7 different series of
Right.
different cases.
And this has gone throughout the United States. You talk about North Carolina cards and LA or California cards, I think, and other states.
Yeah. There was a international homicide conference that occurred in Las Vegas, and
Was Nick there with you when that was going on?
no, Nick, one of the trips he didn't make. He made the trip to San Diego now.
I heard about
Yeah.
that one. Well, we won't talk about that
No.
one on this episode.
I think they're still looking for him there, but that's another story.
Yeah, Tommy was working unsolved homicides. I was still in the drug unit at that point in time, so I didn't get to go along on that trip with them.
Okay, sorry.
But he did go to the San Diego trip where we did present the case out there to the San Diego Police Department and the Sheriff's Office, met with the Department of Corrections supervisor and got them put into San Diego, into the jails here in San Diego. And that was another case where a year after that happened, I get a call from the sergeant out there, and he goes, "Hey, we've had these a year. I don't know if we're going to redo them again." And that's what, just give it a chance. You never know. It wasn't 2 months later, he calls me back. He goes, "I'm so glad." He said, "We redid it. We put a case in. We just solved a double homicide of a mother and her son that was killed, in a drive-by shooting. They were just innocent victims that were there. But they were able to solve that case with the deck of cards. But when I was in Las Vegas for the International Homicide Conference, myself and John Aguero, who was a not statewide prosecutor, but the Polk County prosecutor,
right,
and we were doing a presentation on Serrano. Well, I brought enough of the cold case cards to give out to all the participants, and there was like 400 agents or 400 detectives there, agencies all over, federal, state, and local, and so I gave them all a deck of cards. So after that, I started getting, bombarded with phone calls. "Hey, how did you set this up? How did this thing get going?" And so I helped a lot of the different agencies set up their cards. And now it's in at least 16 states, and there's been 30 documented cases solved.
That's phenomenal.
So
that's phenomenal. Did you say you went to Australia or New Zealand to set up something like this?
No, from that International Homicide Conference, there was someone there that took the cards back.
Okay.
And I got a call from Sue Stalling, who was a constable there in Queensland, Australia. And she said, I love the idea. How'd you get started? So kind of went over with her, and then they got a deck of cards, a lot bigger cards. I mean, I had a deck of the cards. She sent them to me, and but their reward was like $200,000. Just unbelievable amount of money that they were offering for their rewards, and they had success, and they just redid a deck in Australia here recently, and same thing with London. I think London has their first deck of cards.
It's got to make you very proud of this, of what you've created, and you didn't create it by yourself. Obviously, a lot of people are involved, but I mean, you led it. It's got to give you a great satisfaction that you are helping solve these crimes all across the world now. Just from this idea of how can I get some more help from the jail inmates.
Oh, you're right. Did have a lot of help on it. The guys producing the cards, the people that would listen. I had a lot of people kind of butting heads with me initially, getting the cards going, but then after that, and once they saw the success, it's really worked out well.
And you said a deck of cards cost about $5 when you did it originally, so that's 145 times 5.
Well,
or 45,000 times 5.
I think initially they were getting the decks, the effective playing cards is where they came from.
Right.
And they were getting the cards for like 99 cents from China.
Okay.
And I think at that time they were selling them for $2, $1.50, something like that. And then they went up to $5 over a period of time.
But when an inmate would come in, they would get this as what was distributed, whether it's a toothbrush, soap, or whatever you get as an inmate when you get booked in. Was that part of your book-in stuff, or did they have to request it?
No, they were given. Each one was given a card, so we knew that each inmate had a deck of cards. And so it, like I said, worked out well.
Is this program still going on? Has it kind of slowed or died, or what do we need to do to keep it going?
Unfortunately, no one from FDLE has kind of picked up the lead and followed up on it, but there is a sheriff, I want to say, up around Bay County that just initiated another deck of cards for the state. I don't know if that's just local for that region or if it's statewide, but I think it's kind of just local. But yeah, it's constantly. I mean, even Warner Robins, Georgia, they just started a deck of cards. And, I still get calls, even though I'm a private citizen. I'm not a investigator anymore for the FDLE, but I still get calls all over because I work, for Howland Thornhill, and they're able to get my name and information as their investigator.
Right. Todd's podcast is sponsored in part by Saunders Real Estate, your trusted partner in land and commercial real estate since 1996. With over 125 expert advisors located throughout the Southeast United States, the full-service brokerage specializes in a wide range of property types from farms and ranches to commercial buildings and development land. If you're looking to build your legacy with a confident investment, please visit SaundersRealEstate.com or call 877-518-5263 to connect with an advisor today. So let's move on to some of the case, and I probably Nelson Serrano might be the one I want to talk about most. There's a couple other I want to get to, but tell a little about who he was and a quadruple murderer, but tell about him, how the process went for you to track him down in his home country, how you had to get him back. That's a very interesting story, is you getting him back here to face a judge and get convicted.
Well, the murders occurred on December 3rd, 1997, and it was a garment manufacturing rack where they made garments that they sent all over the world. Like you would see at Sears and back then J.C. Penney's,
right?
But they were racks that were designed and set up, and it went from a business making $1 million a year to making $11 million. So the business really started expanding, and there was 3 partners. Initially, there was Mr. Gonzalez.
Okay.
George Gonzalez. I just drew a blank. Anyway, George Gonzalez, Phil Dasso, and Nelson Serrano. Well, George and Phil knew each other from New York, and they had their business. They had patented some of these things. I mean, George was an engineer. And anyway, so Nelson Serrano was a salesman up there. So that's how they ran into him. Well, they decided to move the business from New York to Florida. It was cheaper, didn't have to pay the taxes that they had to pay in New York, and plus they thought it'd be a lot safer. So they moved the business here. The business started booming. This is like 5 or 6 years into the business being moved to Bartow. And during this time period, the other 2 partners, Phil Dasso and George Gonzalez, found out that Nelson Serrano and his son, Francisco Serrano, had stole $250,000 from the business. And but they were able to catch it in time and put a freeze on the bank, and they fired Nelson Serrano. So he became upset. Bartow PD was called out there. They had locked him out of his office. He's trying to kick the door down. So there was a lot of threats made, from Nelson to mainly George Gonzalez at the time. And so that kind of initiated, and that's what started, the bitter hatred between the former partners.
And he came back sometime later, or they were murdered, and that's when the saga of tracking down the case started?
Well, right after he's kicked out, he opens a separate business in Lakeland. Nelson Serrano does. And so they're kind of rivals. Well, on December the 3rd, Nelson Serrano is in Atlanta, Georgia on a business deal with his separate business. So Frank Dasso leaves early that day, leaving George Gonzalez, his partner, his son Frank Dasso, and his son-in-law. So they're all at the business. Well, they're waiting to be picked up by Diane Petiso, which was the son-in-law of Mr. Dasso, George Petiso, there at the office. So anyway, she's coming to pick them up. That particular day, none of them return home. And it gets to be 7 o'clock, so they start to panic. Well, they had a fear of Nelson Serrano because Nelson had made all these death threats and so forth. So Mr. Dasso, Phil Dasso, and Nicoletta Dasso go to the business. And when they go in, Miss Dasso trips over her daughter, who's in the hallway of the business, and starts screaming. Wow. Mr. Dasso calls 911 to get Bartow Police Department. They can't understand him. He's got a thick Italian accent. So, but they finally understand where he's at. So as he's leaving the building where they can hear him to wave the cops, he gets locked out of all things of the business. So Miss Dasso's going from her daughter. She goes to see where her son and son-in-law's at, and sees 3 bodies in this room. Wow. That of her kid. And so Mr. Dasso comes back in, and anyway, it's all a 911 call. It's just horrible to hear, and you can imagine, what they saw. And so anyway, after that, we start working. We put together a task force, and we start working on the case.
Were you with the SO at that time, or were you with the FDLE?
I was with FDLE.
Okay.
And
so how did you start? I mean, was Serrano your first choice? Hey, I got to go at least interview him, or that started the whole process of him with his alibi and then heading back to his home country?
Well, the first thing we had a meeting, with Paul Wallace there with the state attorney's office and the sheriff's office and Bartow PD and FBI. And so one of the things that we did initially, we went to talk to Mr. Dasso, Phil Dasso, one of the surviving partner, at his residence in Winter Haven, and kind of got the background, as far as problems they've had and about Nelson Serrano. So we had all that background information, but we put together a task force. We had everybody coming in from all the different agencies, Lakeland and Bartow Sheriff's Office, like I said, the FBI, and started looking at things. But we set up a tip line, and we had like 100 tips, within the first day, and nothing like that had occurred in Bartow ever, right. At that time. And so people were panicking. You ain't got these crazies coming in, killing 4 people. What's the story? That kind of deal. So anyway, we began following up on Nelson Serrano. And after years, literally, it took, I would say, 2 years into the investigation before we started really making any headway. Although Nelson was one of the prime suspects, right. From the get-go, it was something where we had to, cross every T and dot every I kind of deal to make sure we had everything together. And so in the meantime, I'm attempting to talk to Nelson Serrano, and he's lawyered up at that time. But we do a show on America's Most Wanted, and during the time doing the show, we also set up a pen register, seeing what phone calls being made back and forth. And so we developed an inner circle of Nelson Serrano and his family, and so started working it, that way.
Once you kind of narrowed him down, is that when he started saying, hey, I've got to get out of the country? Or did he just flaunt that you can't catch him?
Well, he was kind of prove it.
Right.
You're crazy. I didn't do it. I was in Atlanta, Georgia at the time. So one of the things, a couple of the agents that I sent, Bartow detective and also one of our FDLE agents up to La Quinta Inn where Nelson was seen on the video. And so they reported back that Nelson Serrano couldn't have done it. We have him on video.
In Atlanta.
That he's in Atlanta, got him on video in the afternoon, so there's no way he's the one. So then I'm thinking, we're thinking, the task force, that maybe he's hired, some hit guys to pull this off. Because at that point, it's almost obvious that he was the one involved in this. And so it's just, I'm watching the video myself later, when they return and all. So, but I watch it the whole 24 hours to see if there's anybody that may have come into the hotel to see Nelson Serrano that he may have hired. But when I watched it, I noticed that Nelson came in at 12:21 p.m. that afternoon, December the 3rd, the day of the murders. And then fast forward to, I think it was 9:38. And so you see Nelson come back into the hotel and wearing the same outfit that he had worn earlier, when you see him leaving at 12:21. So I'm like, wait a minute, that gave him, and it turned out it was like 9 hours and 57 minutes. He could have flown from Atlanta, Georgia to Orlando, where we found out that he had his personal car along with a rental car that his nephew had left for him, got his rental car, when he flew in, drove to Bartow, commit the quadruple murders, shoot all 4 of them. And it appeared that he came in and killed, the 3 victims first, the 3 males, George, and Frank. And then Diane, who at that time was assistant state attorney at the state attorney's office, who came to pick him up, her brother and her husband. He heard her coming, chased her down the hall and grabbed her by the hair of the head, and then shot her initially in the cheek, with the same .22 that he'd shot the other 3 guys with. So then it appears he probably went back in and got his stuff together from the other room of the other gun, because as he's leaving, he props her back up, and I guess she's probably, still somewhat alive, and he shoots her in the back of the head with a .32. So you got a .22 and a .32 that's involved. And information was developed, during interviews and stuff from one of the guys I talked to, that Nelson used to hide a .32 revolver up in the ceiling tile of his office. And that's where all 3 of the victims were found, in his former office there. So, I know I'm probably getting off track, but then fast forward to him coming to commit the homicides. Well, after he had shot all 4 victims, he then takes the rental car and drives to the Tampa airport. And he goes from Tampa back to Atlanta. And then that's when he's shown on the video there at 9:57, whatever the time was. No, it's 10:21. But he also he made a phone call the very next day to his nephew. And so his nephew was a big part of this case as well. And his nephew finally admitted that, he wanted me to take the rental car, park it next to his car, and because he was meeting his Brazilian girlfriend. So that was his story.
Okay.
And but so anyway, we're putting all this stuff together. We got the rental car, and back then this was before 9/11.
Right.
So there wasn't the videos, and you didn't have to show the ID. But the thing about the tickets that we found that was purchased, it was the same time we found that his personal car was at the Orlando airport. Same time a ticket was purchased in cash, and it was a round trip ticket from Atlanta to Tampa, and then back from Tampa to Atlanta. But the second portion of the ticket was never used.
Okay.
So then we go to Tampa and don't find, where we can put his car there, but we do find another ticket was purchased in cash going from Tampa to Atlanta, and then back Atlanta, Tampa, the second portion never used. So, it's just like putting it all together. So we think, we have a case, so, we're working with the state attorney's office, hand in hand. Jerry Hill was state attorney, and it was John Aguero and Paul Wallace, who's, working on this case. And they're like, still not enough, even though you have the motive, you've got all this, but it's still, we can't physically put him at the
scene of the crime.
So then I can't believe that our luck is that bad, because we're trying to find these parking tickets where Nelson had gone and parked his personal car there, or the rental car, because unlike Tampa and Orlando, when you go there and you go to park your car, they give you a ticket. And then when you leave, you give the ticket, and then you pay whatever the toll is. So I'd sent a couple of detectives there several times to the Orlando airport, and they'd always say, hey, there's no tickets. The guy said that the tickets they used to have been destroyed. And this happened like on 3 different occasions over the course of the 2 years of the investigation. And, it was getting where the media was like, Bartow case, quadruple murder still unsolved. Detectives, they're clueless and stymied on the case. So there was kind of a joke like, are you detective clueless or are you detective stymied? Right. So anyway, there was getting to be a lot of pressure, and from the family as well. Got a call from Mr. Dasso and his brother-in-law, Claudio, to shoot us, and from New York. And they're like, Agent Ray, we know you guys are doing the best you can, but we just don't think you guys down south can solve this case. We're hiring a New York detective who just retired. He worked homicides his whole career up in New York, and we're hiring him to come help you with the case. Don't mean to insult you. What do you think about that? I said, that's great. I said, the more the merrier. Anybody that can add to it. I said, maybe he'll see something that we're not seeing.
New angles, new eyes.
So anyway, I go up to New York, doing some more follow-up background information on not just Serrano, but on the victims' families. And they say, hey, the detective that's going to be working with you is in the house. So I go into Mr. Dasso's house that he still had in Staten Island, and there was a New York detective, and he's like apologetic. He said, listen, I'm sorry. I said, don't be sorry. I said, we could use your help. We have a lot of help, but, there's nothing wrong with somebody else. And he goes, well, what's your plans? I mean, I said, well, we've got a wiretap going on his phone. We've got these PIN registers, and we've got the surveillance. Anyway, I just laid out what we were doing and what our focus was. And so he goes, well, thank you very much. And he shook my hand. He goes back out and he gives Mr. Dasso $10,000 that he'd given him. He said, leave this guy alone and he'll solve this case for you. Which, my hat's off to him, because a lot of guys would stuck money in their pocket and had a little vacation in Florida, while they tried to solve the case.
Hi, I'm State Attorney Brian Haas of the 10th Judicial Circuit of Florida. Please be sure to listen to my episode on Todd's podcast, where we discuss the State Attorney's Office and the criminal justice system. Thanks.
So how did Serrano get to Ecuador? Okay. And how did you get down there?
Okay, well, one of the things I'd left out on the parking tickets, and Brad Grice from Lakeland Police Department, I grabbed him. I said, look, I want to see where those parking tickets were. I can't believe that they're destroyed. And so I called Matthew Bauer, the aviation attendant, and he goes, hey, you can come look, but they're not here. Prior to getting there, he calls and says, you're not going to believe it. He said, we found several boxes of October, November, and December of 97 and January of 98. I said, perfect, don't touch them. So Brad and I go there. We have boxes, hundreds, thousands of these cards, and we're going through the cards, and then we find the Nelson Serrano rental car. And so we put it seal it up, put it in a bag. Then we find his personal car. Then we find the nephew's car. Then we find Nelson's car when he went there and purchased a ticket, the same in November. So all these things are matching up. So we're just praying that we're going to have good luck on the fingerprint. So Lynn Ernst, who was our FDLE crime scene analyst, she called me back in couple of days later, and she goes, Tommy, where are you buying me lunch at? I said, anywhere you want it. And she goes, bingo. She says, we got 3 hits. We got Nelson's fingerprints on the parking ticket, the day of the homicides. So that put him back in the crime scene area. And then we got his print on a couple of the day he purchased the ticket at the airport, which all the time frame matched. And so then, I'm going to John Aguirre and Paul Wallace and Jerry Hill and said, what do you think now? We did a PowerPoint presentation. He goes, let's get him. By that time, he was getting suspicious, and he had fled to Ecuador. So
And dual citizenship?
he had dual citizenship. So in Ecuador, you cannot extradite an Ecuadorian citizen, even if they have dual citizenship. So we did everything we could, contacted the Department of International Affairs and doing everything to get a provisional arrest warrant, and was told, no dice, nothing you can do. If he comes back to the United States, we'll get a UFAB warrant, unlawful flight, and avoid prosecution, and so we'll get him. I said, that's not going to work. He's not that dumb. He'll never come back to the United States. And so anyway, worked on that constantly, trying to come up with a way to get him back. In the meantime, some of the supervisors in Tampa are like, hey, we've gotten a warrant, we need to move on, got other cases, that kind of thing. So I ended up being transferred temporarily to Miami because of not wanting to go along with the program, I guess.
Right.
Good way of putting it. Nick, do you think? Is that
Oh, definitely. Yeah, they were wanting to put a stop to it and have you go on something else. So.
Yeah, let's move Tommy out of
Absolutely, yeah.
out of here.
So I was sitting down in Miami working with some agents from Tallahassee on a 20-year-old police officer homicide, Deputy Behan, who was ambushed and shot while he was writing a report. And the two suspects were young, 16 and under, that were mentally challenged, and found out that they didn't do it. And, it was just kind of anyway, we cleared the guys. The case is still unsolved, although we think one of the corrections officer's girlfriend had a lot to do with it. But while I'm working that case, I just happened to be at Embassy Suites down in Miami. And I see a sign that says International Military Intelligence Meeting. And I was talking to the other agents. I said, I wonder if somebody's in there from Ecuador. And they're like, Tommy, let it go. I said, no, I'm going to go in there and see. They said, you're going to get trouble. Yeah. So I go inside this room. There's a lot of military dressed officers and all, and they go, can I help you? Well, I had my FDLE badge out. I said, sir, I'm an agent with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Is anybody here from Ecuador? And this guy stood up and he goes, I'm Colonel Contrino from Quito. I said, sir, you're the man I need to talk to. So anyway, I had the PowerPoint presentation and a booklet. So I showed him, this is what happened. These are the four people that were murdered, execution style. One was the assistant state attorney. And I said, they were all good as gold. And so anyway, he said, I could help you. Call DEA agent Bill Hudson, who's in charge of down there, and call another guy who was with the U.S. Embassy. And so I said, okay. I said, but they wouldn't give me a warrant. He said, let me make some calls. So this guy made some calls. So I ended up going to Washington, D.C., getting a warrant for Nelson Serrano for the Quadruple murders. And we get him indicted, go to the grand jury and all that stuff. So
So you now have a reason to go to Ecuador.
Yeah, so now I have a reason to go. Before they wouldn't let me, but we had a big meeting, with Jerry Hill and Jim Sewell, who was our director for FDLE at the time, and all the attorneys. Well, Paul Wallace and I, he was a prosecutor, just retired recently, great guy, but he goes down there with me along with our interpreter, Gene Casso from FDLE. And so we're down there for a couple of weeks. Can't find Nelson. There's a Colonel Jorge Pinarera that used to be in charge of the Ecuador National Police, and now he was working assigned to the DEA. Well, he still, had his group of guys from the Ecuadorian police, so he's assisting on the case. And so he starts looking for Nelson, find out there's like 2 or 3 different locations, where Nelson could be. And we have a PowerPoint presentation, and we have 5 meetings set up with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, with the Ecuador National Police, with Interpol, and then the last one was going to be the Ecuadorian chief judge of the Supreme Court. And but we had everything ready. So we go into the first meeting with the officers and start showing it. And about second slide, they're like, stop. This is in English. We speak Spanish here. We don't speak English. You need to redo your PowerPoint.
It's a good thing you didn't take Nick because he doesn't speak Spanish either.
Yeah, he could have faked it, but so even though we had the interpreter that was interpreting, and I mean that makes so much sense.
Right.
Something you didn't think about. So, but Jorge, the retired major with Ecuador National Police, he goes and he does a PowerPoint in Spanish in 20 minutes. So we're back there. So we do the presentation, and they're all shocked by, Nelson Serrano at one time owned like 37 guns. And during all this investigation, we did a search warrant of his house in Lakeland and found another 47 guns and every kind of 32 Browning you could imagine, 22s, but unfortunately none were the matched murder weapon. And so we're showing all that, and they're kind of shocked by how many they have. So the last phase to get this thing approved, to get him extradited, would be the chief judge of the Ecuadorian Supreme Court. So we're there with the meeting. And so while we're there, Gene Caso, the interpreter's next to me, and Bill Hudson, the DEA, who's fluent in Spanish, he's there negotiating the meeting, and we're doing the same PowerPoint presentation. Well, the judge leans over to his assistant, and he says something in Spanish. And so I asked Gene Caso, I said, Gene, I said, what did he tell him? He said he told him to go find out his worth. I said, his worth? He said, yeah, find out how much money he has and if he's of any influence here in Ecuador. So Serrano, yeah, I'm talking about Nelson Serrano. So anyway, the guy leaves. He's gone. We finish the presentation. The guy comes back, and he's talking to the judge, and then the judge says, I'll do this. We'll have trial here in Ecuador, but I will not approve extradition. He said he will not be extradited. And so at that point we said, look, we'll drop the death penalty. If you'll go ahead and agree to have him extradited. And they said, no, he's not been extradited. We'll try him here. So he goes, and, we'll call you once we have him apprehended. So he said, thank you. So anyway, we're leaving. And so the Bill Hudson goes, well, Tommy, so you guys, fly back to Florida. If and when we find him, we'll arrest him, and then we'll just have the trial here. I said, well, what will that mean? I mean, what could he be sentenced to? He goes, tell you the truth, probably house arrest.
Because of his net worth.
Because of his net worth and his contacts in Ecuador. And so he said, he'll probably never see prison. I said, well, that's not going to work. Right. And he goes, well, we don't have any choice. And so anyway, so Bill Hudson said, Tommy, you guys need to get on the plane and go back tomorrow, and I'll keep working this, but I got drug cases to work as well. We got some major drug cases going on. So I said, Bill, I'm not leaving. And so I looked at Gene Caso, the interpreter from FDLE. He goes, Tommy, I'm here with you. I said, Paul, he goes, Tommy, we need to get on back to Polk County, And I said, Paul, you can leave, but I'm not leaving. Anyway, long story short is Paul flies out the next morning. I stay. I get a phone call about 5 o'clock from the DEA agent, Bill Hudson. And when I answered the phone, he knew that I should have left at 4 o'clock to make the plane. He goes, you so-and-so. Tommy Ray? He goes, I'm headed down there now. So anyway, I called Gene Caso's in another room. I said, Gene, I'm going down the lobby. And he goes, what's going on? I said, well, you may want to come down. You're about to see a heck of a fight. And say, what? I said, I'll just meet you down there. Well, when Bill gets there, Jorge, the major, is there with him. And so I think we have a way to get Nelson back. And so they talked about when Nelson came into Ecuador, he put that he was a U.S. citizen. So rather than get him extradited, they were going to try to get him deported. And so that's what worked out. They were able to find him. They had 30 of the cops out looking for him. They found him at a restaurant. He was kind of in disguise, had a big hat, and he and his wife, another couple. But they yanked him up, was going to put him in the jail there, but he tried to bribe one of the officers, offered him $10,000 to let him go. And so the major got concerned, or he was a major at the time. Anyway, he got concerned and said, I'll have to watch him. So he took him to a canine unit that he had started and kept him there at the canine unit till the next day. And so everything's worked out. The judge had signed the deportation thing, and we knew we had to get him out of there just as quick as we could. So the American Airlines agreed for us to fly him back, the next day. So anyway, we're kind of up all that night. We were stationed at something called the Turtle Head Pub. It's a British pub there in Quito, where everybody spoke English. And so that was kind of the area we stationed. And the major came back and said, hey, he's secure. We got him secure. You guys can leave in the morning. So next day, I get 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We get the tickets. We're waiting in line. And so I said, where's Nelson? Is there any way he can get out of this? And they said, well, the only way if he were to, fake a heart attack or something, and they won't transport him on the plane. So I'm just, praying, oh, come on, we're so close, so close. And so we get on the plane, and it's myself and Bill Hudson and Gene Casso and another DEA agent. Plane's empty. We're on the very back. And so we're waiting for them to bring Serrano. So we see Serrano in a dog kennel truck kind of getting out, he's handcuffed, and I'm watching, from the very back there. And he's on the tarmac, and he's walking up toward the stairs, and he's surrounded by Ecuador National Police, like a couple on each side. And as he starts to walk up the stairs there, I lose sight of him because of the wing, but then the flight attendant, she grabs her mouth like, oh my gosh, and he's fallen. And before I could get out of my seat to go see what's going on, the Ecuadorian cops bring him in, and they put him in the aisleway there, just kind of dropped him and waved at me, like, here he is.
He's yours now.
So, but the flight attendant goes, call an ambulance. We need him, we can't transport him. So I go up to him, and Bill Hudson goes past me to talk to the pilots. And so I grab him by his shoulders, and I could tell he's squinting his eyes that he was okay. Pulled him back to the back seat there, and so put him in the thing. And but the flight attendant had grabbed his feet, keep him from going, and their shoes came off their hand, and she threw the shoes down, that kind of deal, and get him to the very back. Well, he had an abrasion. What had happened was he gets halfway up and decides, I ain't going, and he spins around and tries to flee, and he falls and hits his head, on the side steps. And so just an abrasion, nothing serious. So I got a bag of ice, and I put the bag of ice on his head and keep the blood. And he's out, like he's unconscious. But like I said, I get breathing, and he was fine. And so Bill talks to the pilots. I got the ice on his head, So they said they're going to clear the rows, 3 seats in front of us and 3 seats to the other side, which is what they did. And I'm like, oh, come on, let's get this plane loaded. Let's get out of here. So finally, get everybody loaded. The plane takes off, and I'm like, it's such a sigh of relief. And by that time, about 10 minutes into the flight, the plane starts circling around, and you kind of fly up, and we're kind of over the Andes Mountain. And so I asked Bill Hudson, I said, are we turning around? So I was thinking, somebody's called, and they said, bring him back.
Right.
And he said, I don't know. And then one of the pilots comes out, and he points at me and motions for me to come over to him. So I walk up to him. I said, yes, sir. He goes, is this the guy that killed the 4 people in Florida? I said, yes, sir, it is. He goes, listen, there's a way that we can open the bottom here, and we can push him out. So, which I knew he was kidding, but he was an American Airlines pilot. And I said, well, that'd be great, but we fought too hard to get him back for trial. So I said, we're bringing him back. And so anyway, on the way back, he kind of, like he's coming to and stuff. And he goes, "Thank you, young man." He's very polite. "Thank you, young man." And I said, "For what?" He goes, "Well, for the ice." And so I said, "You're welcome." And so he goes, "You're such a nice guy. You're nothing like that guy in Florida." I said, "What guy's that?" He says, "A. Ray something." I said, "Tommy Ray?" He goes, "Yes, Tommy Ray." I said, "Who do you think you're talking to?" He goes, "You're not Tommy Ray. Your hair's all gray." I said, "You did this to me." So anyway, then he came up with some cock and bull story as what he thinks happened, like a drug deal and all. But so anyway, we get him back to Bartow and
get him convicted.
He was.
Was he on death row or was he life?
No, he was put on death row. Since they didn't accept, the deal for the extradition, and we got him deported, it was off the table. So we charged him, with the first-degree murder, 4 counts.
And he just died last year, right?
He died, natural causes. He was one of the oldest guys on death row. I think he was late 80s or something.
Was his nephew ever charged, the one that helped him with a rental car?
No, his nephew was a big key to the case, and we never could prove that his nephew actually knew.
Okay.
About. He said, "Hey, I wanted to meet my girlfriend," which didn't make sense. But still, he was very cooperative. Told about what Nelson told him to say at the grand jury and things like that. So, but it was a long case.
Well, it was an adventure to get that guy back, and your dogged determination and the team, the effort that went in to get him arrested and get him back and convicted and jailed was phenomenal.
Yeah. But if it wasn't for the Ecuador National Police,
right,
the Colonel Jorge Pinarera that ended up after we left, after we get Nelson back and he's tried and convicted and all, a new president of Ecuador takes over, and all those cops that assisted, including Pinarera, were arrested for kidnapping and that kind of stuff. They've since been acquitted, and but I got a call and some said, "Hey, you and Paul Wallace, you should never come back to Ecuador because there's warrants on you guys as well."
Wow.
I said, "Well, Paul Wallace should have stayed, and he's going to be arrested for kidnapping, which he had already left before all that took place."
So it all started from you pissing off your bosses in Tampa, and they shipped you to Miami. You had that chance encounter with the Ecuadorian military.
Well, you know what? I think because I think divine intervention.
Yeah.
I think God had his hand in this whole thing and kind of directed, it's nothing I did. It's something, at his direction with all the great help and the people involved in this case.
Was there anything else? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. I was going to say something. Me working at FDLE with Tommy, once they got the arrest warrant for him, they considered the case done.
Right.
And anything that happened after that point was all on Tommy Ray.
Right.
That was all him getting that guy back here to the U.S. because they even transferred him, like he said, to go to Miami to help on another case.
Yeah, get him out of here.
To get him working on another case because they said, "Hey, he spent too much time on it. It's solved. They got an arrest warrant and get on something else." And from that point on, that was all Tommy making contacts and getting that guy back here to the States.
Hey, everybody. This is your host, Todd Dantzler. As most of you know, I'm a partner with Saunders Real Estate and have been a very active and working broker for over 42 years. I have fostered strong relationships throughout the state of Florida, working on properties ranging from agriculture and development land to multifamily, commercial, and industrial projects. If you have any real estate needs at all, please give me a call. I'd love to help. My direct line is 863-877-2846. Thank you. I want to touch briefly on the Gainesville murders, Danny Rawling, if you can kind of give a little bit of an abridged version. You worked on that as part of the team when you were with FDLE, correct?
I did. That was, I think, August 1990 is when that occurred.
And what role did you play in all that?
Well, they had set up a task force, and they had like 3 or 4 different squads, and they would have like 2 or 3 agents from FDLE, 2 or 3 detectives from the Alachua County Sheriff's Office and also Gainesville Police Department, and along with Highway Patrol, each having a squad to work different angles, do different leads. I mean, we were having thousands of leads coming in almost daily. Yeah. So we were assigned to follow up all the leads, and it was so chaotic because the parents, of course, were coming getting their kids and getting them out of school, and it was just crazy times.
And was he just a transient that was camping, and that's where y'all found him at his campground, or how did y'all track him down?
Well, actually, he came from Shreveport, Louisiana.
Okay.
Matter of fact, his father was a police officer in Shreveport who had a violent history of domestic violence. The father did as well. And so there was a triple murder that occurred just a few months prior to the Gainesville homicides that Danny Rawling was later proven that he committed those homicides prior. In Shreveport.
Wow.
He killed a mother, her 8-year-old son, and the grandfather. Same thing, stabbed him with a K-bar knife, and with such force, for the mother that it went like 2 inches into the concrete floor.
Good Lord.
And so then he just travels around, he comes down to Florida and to Gainesville, where he starts, committing the horrendous crimes that he committed there, the murders.
How many people did he murder throughout his life?
Well, there's 8 people that we know for sure. So, and I think whatever flipped his switch, in his brain out in Shreveport was kind of initiated the whole thing.
And wasn't there another young man that was kind of the target for a while that didn't all of a sudden, hey, he really didn't do it, and that you kind of got back on track with Rawling?
There was a guy by the name of Edward Humphrey.
Yep.
That was the initial suspect. He had made statements, that he's going to cut somebody's head off, different things like that. And but the guy was so physically awkward, a lot of us no way this guy did it. Right. As a matter of fact, I can recall talking with some of the profilers, Dale Hinman from FDLE and some of the FBI profilers that came down on the case, and we're saying, wait a minute, this guy, at the crime scenes, he's taking bleach, he's pouring bleach over to get rid of any kind of DNA, that kind of stuff, and this Humphrey, doesn't have it together to do that kind of stuff. And they're like, sometimes they kind of get into trance, but we weren't buying that. Myself and John Burton, another FDLE agent. And so even though that's what they were thinking at the time, they got such tunnel vision on Humphrey, unfortunately, kind of delayed things in the final arrest of Danny Rawling.
Was Rawling put on death row? Was he executed?
He was put on death row. He was executed, I think, 2006, somewhere in there. And but the crazy thing, he gets married while he's on death row, and it was almost a circus atmosphere during his trial, where he's singing to his bride, but they put an end to him pretty quick.
Yeah. Leo Schofield, did you work on that? There's a podcast out Bone Valley. I don't know if you've listened to it, but were you involved from the FDLE level when Schofield?
I think at that time I was with the sheriff's office.
Were you with the sheriff's office?
And I was a homicide detective, but Bob Weeks was a case agent working that case. And I sat in during the preliminary interview of the case itself. And to me, there was no doubt. He's guilty as sin. Yeah. And this whole thing, with his father, talking about divine intervention, being led to where her body's at, floating with a piece of plywood over it. Right. And there's all these things that weren't admitted. But I know that, Gilbert King may have been one of the guys pushing the innocent.
And, the Innocence Project, I think, or something like that.
But they got a guy that was crazy enough to admit to
Jeremy
this
Scott.
case. Yes. And, he was just a thief. Wasn't smart enough to do that other kind of stuff. But it just unfortunately that he was there and I guess took the radio out of her car.
Or I saw a statistic or heard a statistic that about 50% of the homicides in the United States are solved and the other 50 are not solved. Is that an accurate stat, do you think?
It could be. I'm not really sure. You know, I would think now with all the new DNA would be a lot
record.
Yeah, I'd think 70-30 or something.
Yeah.
But,
so we've had a pretty heavy episode today, and I want to kind of lighten things up a little bit. You've left out some of the gruesome things that we had talked about, and you've investigated some very gruesome things. Is your opinion that is the death penalty a deterrent? Are you a believer in it, or do you not believe in it?
Well, I used to believe in death penalty, and as a matter of fact, in the early days, and I'm saying the 80s, when I worked at the sheriff's office homicide, that was a good way to get people to admit, the crimes. Hey, you're looking at the death penalty if you want to tell the truth, and you're looking at life. So a lot of people, when they knew that, and I don't even say the death penalty. I think when the electric chair went away,
Right.
so did the fear. I mean, there was a fear about being put on an electric chair that so many people I talked to, like, in one of the cases I worked, as a matter of fact, it was the very first case that I solved in 1982 when I was working cold cases for the sheriff's office. There was a couple of hitmen from Columbus, Georgia, came and shot and killed a guy in Lakeland, I-4 and 33. And each shot him with a different gun. But they confessed, there's no doubt in my mind, because of the fear of the electric chair at that time. And
Old Sparky.
Yeah. You guys have seen some of the worst things imaginable. I think you've seen people at their absolute worst. How do you leave it behind at the end of the day? I had mentioned that yesterday when we were chatting. I mean, how do you figure out how to compartmentalize things so it doesn't affect your family, doesn't affect your friends? I mean, you got to take it home with you to some degree. How do you deal with that?
Well, fortunately, I've been married like 42 years, and I met my wife. She was working in records at the sheriff's office.
Okay.
And so she's known my whole career.
Right.
So, but I'm able to, I'm fortunate enough where I kind of put it aside. I get home, and I take my son to the ball games and, not even talk about it.
You're a dad and a husband at that point.
Exactly. Sometimes, and mainly it was the Serrano case, because it took so many years. There's a lot of times, where they wouldn't see, after everybody went to bed, I'd go sit in the recliner and I'd be thinking, what haven't we done?
Yeah.
It's got to be something that we've missed here. And, that kind of thing. But it was nothing where, it affected the family, that kind of thing. I kept separate.
Well, how do you decompress at the end of the day? I mean, is it, I just got to spend time with my family and that is my refuge and that's how I return to some normalcy?
Well, it used to be a pontoon boat. I'd go out my
Right.
pontoon boat, spend some time out there and all. And I'd go visit Nick, and that's always...
Nick's become a
treat.
cat person now.
Oh, yeah, I can't believe
It's
it.
sad
Yeah,
how
it
the mighty
is.
have fallen.
Hey, you were not supposed to mention that. Nobody knows that.
It's really a tiger. It's not a cat. You're now an investigator with Howell and Thornhill, the law firm in Winter Haven. They've got several offices. What do you do as an investigator for them?
I take photographs of the crashes of vehicles. I assist the interviews of witnesses. I help the family, or clients, kind of go over the case and make sure, we've got everything we need to have and all. So, and also property damage. It becomes an issue sometimes dealing with the insurance companies. Right. So I assist the clients, with property damage issues as well.
So how did you become a deputy? How did you get the itch? How did you say, hey, I think I might want to become involved in law enforcement?
Well, I was out of school for a couple of years. As a matter of fact, I think I was a lifeguard during that time for the county. And there was a deputy that I knew from this girl that I dated then. And he wanted me to go ride with him. And I said, I don't know if I want to, do that. He said, why not? I said, well, I got a Mustang Mach 1. Every time I turn around, there's a Trooper Huggins that's writing me a ticket.
I know too many of you guys.
And so anyway, he kind of laughed. He said, just come do it. So I said, sure. So I think it was a Saturday night or something, he worked the midnight shift down in Juanita. His name was Ernest Ashley. They called him the Big 5-0. And he said, oh, come ride with me. So I did. And he said, listen, he said, I got a warrant on this guy here in Juanita. He said, you play football, right? You know how to tackle. I said, yeah, I did. Yes, I know how to tackle. He goes, well, I'm going to bang on the door, front door. You're going to be around the back porch. When he comes running out, I want you to tackle him. I said, you serious? He goes, yeah, I'm serious. So sure enough, we pull up at the house, cut the lights off, snuck up to the house. I go to the back, bam, 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 Polk County Sheriff's Office. So the guy goes running out, and I can hear him running through the house, And right when he started to jump off the porch, I was able to tackle him. And so Ernest came around there and handcuffed the guy. And I said, man, this is fun, So there was an opening at the Winter Haven Police Department, and he knew the chief, Ham Rogers, at the time. Yep. And so I applied there and started out Winter Haven 3.5 years, and went to Polk County for 10 years, and back then, Grady Judd was my captain, and then went to FDLE for the last 26. But then I had 39 and a half years total. And it just so happened Gary Hester, who I used to work with at the sheriff's office, became chief of Winter Haven.
Absolutely.
He said, Tommy, he says, why don't you come work cold case now that you're retiring from FDLE? I said, yeah, I guess I can do that for about 6 months. So I have a total of 40 years. And
Good for Gary, too, for seeing that.
Well, I did that, but it started being that every time there was a hot case, Gary's calling me up. So I went in his office. I said, Chief Hester, listen, I said, you hired me to work cold cases. He goes, well, Tommy Ray, this last case was 2 days cold. I didn't want any colder. So I just started laughing. But then Tri Thornhill calls me up. He goes, Tommy, so I have an opening. Are you interested? And I'm like, yeah, I think I need a break. And so I thought I'd be there a few years, but I've been there 13 years, still enjoy it.
Good.
And we do a lot of good things for a lot of people, and so well pleased with it.
So our unofficial co-host, Nick, is here. Give me a story about him that we may not know about.
Well, I was Nick's training officer.
Can you cut Nick's mic off so he cannot refute whatever Tommy's getting ready to say?
Anyway, I was... met Nick in a shift meeting, and they said, this is Nick Del Castillo, he's going to be riding with you and all. And so I'm looking, and Nick's kind of cocky acting, walking, his shoulders up like this kind of deal. And so I said, okay. Didn't know him, hadn't even really talked to him. So we had this cars back then, it was 24/7. So one guy's getting out, taking his equipment out, then you're getting in there and the same thing, as long as the car. So back then, we all had the Stetson hats that they're bringing back now, but they were green back then.
Right.
And they'd give you a big speech about, hey, these things are very expensive. You take care of these hats. That's one of the things. And so the drivers had the hat rack. So when I went to, Nick was loading his stuff in, I'm getting stuff out of the car, and he had put his hat, his brand new hat, just been issued in my hat rack. I'm like, the gall of this rookie, putting his hat in my hat rack. So I took his hat out, and I put my hat up there, and I'm holding his hat, outside the door. So Nick starts to get in, and right when he starts to sit down, I put the hat underneath him, and he sits on the hat. His hat, thinking it's my hat. And he goes, oh, man, I'm so sorry. He says, I just crushed your hat. I said, no, rookie, you crushed your own hat. And he looked at it and didn't know what to say. So for about the first 2 hours, we rode around, didn't say a word to each other. Then we looked at each other, we busted out laughing. And he said, man, what are we going to do? Tommy, they gave me such... I said, don't worry, we'll find a deputy that we don't like, and we'll get his hat. So... Anyway,
that's what we ended up doing.
Yeah. Did you get someone else's hat?
That's somebody else's hat.
Does he know that y'all did that?
I don't. I don't think so. I don't think so. But in the academy, when they gave us a uniform, they said you could not get out of your car without having that hat on. That was one of the things. If you didn't have your hat on, you would get in trouble.
Right.
And they said you had to have that hat on every time you left the car. Don't let anything happen to it. And so I was really concerned about the hat, that not letting anything happen to it.
Right.
And then next thing I do, I sit on Tommy's hat, and I'm worried that I ruined his hat. Now, my first day riding with him, I sat on his hat. Little did I know he crushed my hat for me. And man, and I was like, I said, oh, you know, I wasn't mad. I was just like kind of fuming. I said, thinking to myself for that 2 hours, I said, man, what am I going to do about my hat? How am I going to wear that hat? You know, I pushed it back out, but it was all crinkled. And then I just looked at him, and he looked at me, and like he said, we just started laughing, you know, and we've been friends ever since that ever happened. We've been friends. And like Tommy said, he said, we'll find somebody else's hat, and we'll grab their hat.
Yeah, and for those of you that listened to Nick's episode, if you remember the story he told when he arrested the same guy twice in one day, and they were at the restaurant in Auburndale having breakfast on Christmas Day, Tommy was the one having breakfast with Nick when the guy started acting the fool. And
we were on the same shift,
so.
and we went on Christmas morning to go get breakfast at the Clock Restaurant when it was there in Auburndale.
Yeah. Well, we've gone a little long. I appreciate you coming on and giving us the details, because I mean, some of that stuff is just never known, and you know, you've told us a lot. I do want people to, you know, understand that you were the creator of these cards, has been still solving murders and solving these cold cases, and thank you for that. Nick, we didn't have a chance to talk too much today, but this is primarily about Tommy.
No, this was like when I told you after we did our episode, you need to talk to Tommy, because he has a lot of great stuff.
Right.
And then what I talked to you about, the playing cards, you know, I was there at the beginning of it when Tommy's talking about coming up with the cold case cards, and that was 100% his idea to do that.
Phenomenal. Well, thank y'all for coming on. Did I leave anything out that you wanted to say real quick? Did I say something incorrect that you need to correct?
Yeah, you talked about my cat.
I mentioned it. You want to talk about it, and why are you bringing it up? Just because you're a cat lover now.
Yeah, I'm shocked.
I'm disappointed. Shocked and disappointed.
Hey, my cat's name is Taco.
Okay. How'd you get that cat, Nick? We'll talk about that next time.
Yeah,
we'll have you
time.
back on to talk about some other cases.
My
Nick.
commitment cat.
Your commitment cat.
We could spend a week on Nick's stories. Trust me.
I understand, and we can air 20 seconds of it or 20 minutes of it. So thank you both for coming in. Thank you all for your incredible career in law enforcement and working so hard to keep us safe and solving these crimes. It's not just for the community, but it's for the families that were represented, and you know, the hard work that y'all have done is just phenomenal, and I can't thank y'all enough. Appreciate you coming in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode with Tommy and Nick, and I hope you'll join us next time for Todd's podcast. Hey everybody, I want to thank you for listening to Todd's podcast. This has been your host, Todd Dantzler. If you like this episode of Todd's podcast, please tune in next time for another episode of Generally Speaking, where we will have Major General Jake Palumbo and Congressman Scott Franklin, both Air Force and Navy pilots, both with very levels of experience and degrees of competence in flying different aircraft. We will talk about some of the current events going on in the Gulf of Aden, some political events. We talk about the FA-18s that were lost off of the aircraft carrier a few weeks ago, some things that are going on in Congress right now, some budgeting items. It's going to be a very interesting episode, and I hope you'll tune in for that episode of Todd's podcast. As always, don't forget to rate, review, follow, and subscribe to Todd's podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions for me or any suggestions for future guests, please call or text our number at 863-288-0944 or visit todddantzler.com. Again, that's 863-288-0944, or visit my website, todddantzler.com. I look forward to hearing your questions and feedback, and please take care.